During an international conference, an explosive leak reveals an intense argument between President Lula and former President Donald Trump. The backstage fight, which had been kept secret until now, exposes political tensions, disagreements over economic and diplomatic policies, as well as personal provocations that left both Brazilian and American government members concerned. The episode triggers a whirlwind of reactions at the Planalto, in the press, and on the international stage, threatening to affect diplomatic relations and Brazil's image abroad. On the hot morning of an ordinary day in Washington, President Lula arrived to attend an important economic conference. The expectation was for a peaceful diplomatic event with speeches and bilateral negotiations. However, behind the scenes, the tension between Lula and Donald Trump was about to explode. Sources close to the Planalto revealed that the conversation between the two leaders began cordially, but quickly escalated into a heated confrontation over trade tariffs and foreign policies. According to leaked reports, Trump accused Lula of adopting a protectionist stance that harmed American interests, while Lula countered, asserting that Brazil sought autonomy to develop its economy without external interference. The exchange of barbs intensified, and both leaders even stood up from the table, leaving advisors worried about the escalation of the conflict. The recording of the moment was leaked to the press, causing a real earthquake at the Planalto. The Brazilian government scrambled to contain the damage, while allies and opponents debated the political consequences of the argument. In the eye of the storm, Lula stood firm, declaring that Brazil would not back down in defending its interests. But the repercussions of the episode were far from over. The leak of the discussion hit like a bomb at the heart of the Planalto. Ministers and advisors rushed to assess the impact on foreign policy and the government's image. Many were concerned about the aggressive manner in which Trump had treated Lula, fearing that the fallout could weaken future negotiations. The political wing of the government discussed strategies to minimize the damage and prevent the press from further exploiting the case. Meanwhile, sectors aligned with President Lula began reinforcing on social media that Brazil needed to maintain an independent and sovereign stance. Digital militancy mobilized to attack Trump's stance, portraying him as an aggressive and outdated leader willing to harm emerging countries. At the Planalto, however, there was an awareness that the relationship with the U.S. was critical, so discreet efforts were made to de-escalate tensions. Messages were exchanged between diplomats from both countries, while Lula's office explored the best way to deliver a public response that would be firm, yet not further sour relations. In the background, news spread rapidly among embassies and international organizations, raising doubts about the future of economic and political partnerships between Brazil and the United States. As the Planalto tried to control the damage, the U.S. government went into containment mode. White House spokespeople downplayed the incident, stating that disagreements between leaders were natural and part of diplomacy. However, internal sources indicated that Trump was bothered by the leak and considered Lula's stance to be excessively nationalistic and disrespectful. Advisors close to Trump also claimed that the former president was unwilling to yield on economic issues, especially regarding agricultural and industrial exports. The confrontation, according to them, reflected a clash of visions about Brazil's role on the global stage. Meanwhile, the American press explored the leak as yet another chapter in Trump's turbulent political trajectory, highlighting the direct clash with one of Latin America's most charismatic leaders. For many international analysts, the episode was a warning about the fragility of relations between the two countries, especially at a time when the world is facing simultaneous economic and political crisis. In Brazil, Lula's political allies were divided in their reactions to the crisis. His base in Congress defended the president's firm stance, praising his courage to face American pressure. PT leaders and partner parties used the episode to reinforce the discourse of national sovereignty and criticism of neoliberalism, gaining popular support. On the other hand, some opposition sectors criticized Lula for provoking the conflict and jeopardizing strategic agreements. Parliamentarians from conservative and liberal parties pressed for a more diplomatic approach and negotiations that would avoid public confrontations. In the midst of this crossfire, the president sought to balance his public and private response, communicating with his allies to ensure that the discourse remained aligned and that the government's image would not be further damaged. On social media, the debate was boiling over, with hashtags against Trump and in favor of Lula gaining momentum, while foreign netizens closely followed the unfolding confrontation with great interest. Amid the pressure and international fallout, Lula called a press conference to clarify his position. With a firm tone, he reaffirmed Brazil's commitment to dialogue, but stressed that the country would never give up defending its economic and social interests. "We are a sovereign country that respects its partners, but will not accept being treated with arrogance or disrespect," the president stated, reinforcing that Brazil seeks a relationship of equality with the United States. The statement had an immediate impact in the press and on social media, being seen as a direct response to Trump, but without escalating the conflict further. Experts highlighted Lula's ability to maintain a balance between firmness and diplomacy. At the Planalto, the press conference helped alleviate internal tension, but work to rebuild ties with the U.S. continued through diplomatic channels. Behind the scenes, efforts to put out the fire were intense. Advisors and ambassadors from both countries held private meetings, seeking ways to resume dialogue and avoid the conflict damaging strategic areas such as trade, security, and environmental cooperation. Sources from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs revealed that bilateral meetings were arranged to adjust agendas and ensure that the episode did not harm already negotiated agreements. Despite appearances, the tension did not disappear, and leaders on both sides maintained reservations about the adversaries' intentions. The crisis exposed weaknesses in communication and the need for more transparent alignment between teams. Meanwhile, the media continued to dissect the leak, publishing reports detailing each moment of the argument, fueling polarization and public debate. The political crisis between Lula and Trump began to reflect in the stock markets and the currency. Investors expressed concern about the future of trade relations, especially in sectors like agribusiness, manufacturing, and technology. Volatility in Brazilian markets increased, putting pressure on the real and prompting the government to accelerate measures to reassure investors. The Ministry of Economy issued statements reinforcing that Brazil would maintain economic stability and seek to expand global partnerships. Even amid the crisis, Brazilian entrepreneurs linked to exports to the U.S. expressed concern, fearing higher tariffs and trade barriers. Import sectors closely monitored possible changes to customs policies. The episode showed that political conflicts, even between leaders, have a direct impact on the economy, requiring caution and quick strategies to avoid negative consequences. Social media, the confrontation between Lula and Trump became a global trend. Hashtags like #LulaResists and #TrumpProvokes dominated Twitter, with millions of posts from supporters and critics of both sides. Digital influencers, journalists, and celebrities joined in, expanding the discussion beyond traditional political circles. Memes, videos, and even virtual campaigns were created to reinforce favorable narratives for each leader. In Brazil, social movements seized the moment to demand greater autonomy and protectionist policies for national development. Meanwhile, in the U.S., conservative groups highlighted Trump's inflexible stance, valuing his image as a defender of American interests. The digital polarization reflected and amplified the diplomatic crisis, making the resolution even more delicate. Amid the crisis, a secret meeting was organized to try to re-establish dialogue between Lula and Trump. Held in a discreet location, With only the main advisors and diplomats present, the meeting sought to find points of understanding to ease tensions. According to reports, both leaders showed willingness to avoid a total rupture, but maintained strong differences on economic and political issues. The conversation was tense, but considered productive in defining a minimal agenda for cooperation. The meeting, although kept secret at the time, was leaked days later by the American press, reigniting debates and speculations about the future. Of bilateral relations. At the Planalto, the news was received with caution, but also with hope that dialogue could avoid an open confrontation. With the crisis still fresh, the scenario for Brazil-US relations remained uncertain. The fight between Lula and Trump revealed deep differences, but also opened the door for the need to rethink diplomatic strategies. Analysts indicated that, despite the turbulence, there was room for cooperation in areas like the environment, trade, and security, as long as both parties adopted a more respectful and constructive tone. In Brazil, the episode strengthened the discourse of autonomy and sovereignty, but presented the challenge of keeping doors open for international dialogue. In the U.S., Trump's position continued to polarize opinions, with a direct impact on American foreign policy. The episode served as a wake-up call about the complexity of international relations in an increasingly interdependent world marked by political and economic rivalries. The disclosure of the fight reverberated beyond Brazilian and American borders. International organizations such as the United Nations, UN, and Mercosur expressed concern over the diplomatic crisis, emphasizing the importance of dialogue for regional stability. Partner countries of Brazil followed closely, fearing that the conflict could harm ongoing trade agreements. The pressure for Lula and Trump to find a peaceful resolution increased, including direct requests from foreign presidents and ministers. At the Planalto, this pressure reinforced the need for a clear and coordinated strategy to preserve Brazil's image and maintain international credibility. Meanwhile, Lula's advisors began preparing a diplomatic agenda for the coming weeks, seeking multilateral meetings that could help ease tensions. The political opposition in Brazil seized the episode to intensify criticisms of the government. Members of Congress and leaders from center-right parties used the conflict to question the handling of foreign policy and the president's stance. Some opposition figures even suggested that Lula had provoked Trump and put the country at risk, calling for more dialogue and fewer public confrontations. The clash between the government and opposition spilled onto social media, intensifying the internal political climate. ChatGPT dis. On the other hand, social movements and left-wing groups reinforced the resistance narrative, praising the defense of national sovereignty and criticizing what they called American imperialism. The episode, therefore, deepened political polarization in Brazil, reflecting the divisions that had been growing in recent years. Donald Trump didn't let the situation cool down on social media. Just hours after Lula's press conference, Trump posted a series of critical tweets, accusing the Brazilian government of hindering trade negotiations and not valuing the historical partnership between the two countries. His messages sparked a flood of reactions, with supporters and detractors intensifying the digital debate. Trump used the platform to reinforce his image as a tough leader and defender of American interests, even if it meant confronting allies. In Brazil, responses quickly followed, with PT's digital militants and allies launching campaigns to defend Lula and counter Trump's accusations. The virtual clash became international headline news, showing the power of social media to amplify diplomatic conflicts. Faced with the escalation, Lula convened an emergency meeting with ministers, advisors, and the government's inner circle. The goal was to draft a plan to manage the crisis and prevent further deterioration. For hours, they discussed communication, strategies, possible diplomatic responses, and measures to minimize economic and political impacts. The consensus was that Lula should maintain a firm stance, but pursue more behind-the-scenes dialogue with the U.S. Additionally, they decided to reinforce Brazil's presence in international forums to demonstrate leadership and the country's ability to handle crisis. The meeting also marked the mobilization of government sectors to counter the opposition's attempt to exploit the episode to weaken Lula. As the crisis with the U.S. deepened, Lula received messages of support from Latin American leaders. Presidents of neighboring countries and historic allies expressed solidarity, defending Brazil's right to sovereignty and to defend its interests. This support helped balance the diplomatic scales, showing that Brazil was not isolated in the youth crisis. It also reinforced Lula's image as an influential regional leader. However, some countries remained cautious, avoiding taking sides directly to protect their own relations with the U.S. Thus, Latin America became a key stage in the unfolding diplomatic crisis, with allies strengthening ties and trying to prevent major ruptures. In the United States, the crisis with Brazil became part of the electoral debate. Presidential candidates and political analysts discussed the episode, evaluating how Trump's stance might influence his international image. Some critics used the fight to question Trump's ability to handle foreign policy, while supporters praised his firm nationalist posture. The tension with Brazil, a strategic country in Latin America, served as an example of the challenges American diplomacy would face in the coming years. This political scenario highlighted the complexity of the conflict, which transcended bilateral limits and directly impacted the U.S. electoral process. Global media closely followed the crisis's developments. International newspapers and news networks published in-depth analyses, portraying the episode as a symbol of tensions between emerging countries and traditional powers. Reports delved into the backstage of the conflict, the strategies of the involved governments, and the possible consequences for the international order. Experts emphasized the need for dialogue and highlighted Brazil's role as a key player in Latin America. The episode also demonstrated the youth's press's fundamental role in shaping political and diplomatic narratives, amplifying events and influencing public opinion. In the U.S. Congress, the crisis also sparked heated debates. Senators and representatives discussed the impact of tensions with Brazil on trade relations and hemispheric security. Some lawmakers voiced concern over Trump's aggressive tone, while others supported his stance as a defense of American interests. Internal polarization in the U.S. reflected the crisis's complexity, making it difficult to find a unified position on the future of relations with Brazil. At the same time, business groups pressured for more stable negotiations and a return to constructive dialogue. After weeks of tension, informal negotiations between representatives of both countries began to yield results. In discreet meetings, they made progress on trade and bilateral cooperation. Though disagreements remained, the informal agreement helped ease pressure and avoid an open rupture. The Planalto and the White House agreed to keep communication channels open, aiming to strengthen the partnership without letting political crises undermine broader interests. This progress, albeit modest, was seen as a victory for quiet diplomacy and the ability of both sides to overcome impasses. With the crisis officially diffused, the episode left a clear lesson about the importance of dialogue and caution in international politics. It reinforced that even amid disagreements, communication and mutual respect are essential. For Lula, the experience reaffirmed his commitment to Brazil's sovereignty and autonomy, but also clarified the limits and challenges of the global diplomatic game. In the U.S., the crisis exposed internal tensions and the need to adapt to an increasingly multipolar and complex world. In the end, the leaked argument became a landmark moment, reminding the world that international relations are a delicate balance of interests, personalities, and strategy. As the aftermath of the Lula-Trump clash settled, the repercussions continued to unfold across multiple fronts. The incident served as a powerful reminder of the volatile nature of international diplomacy, particularly between two countries with deeply entrenched political and economic differences. While both sides sought to regain their footing, the global community watched closely, aware that the storm was far from over. Back in Brazil, the controversy deepened political divides. While Lula's supporters rallied behind his firm stance, viewing it as a necessary defense of Brazil's sovereignty, the opposition seized the moment to portray the president's actions as reckless. The argument was framed as a dangerous gamble that risked jeopardizing Brazil's economic future by provoking one of the world's most influential leaders. Debates in Congress heated up, with lawmakers calling for more transparent and less confrontational foreign policy. Amid the storm, a sense of uncertainty permeated the Brazilian political landscape. Would Lula's defiance lead to a strengthened image of national sovereignty? Or would it further isolate Brazil from key international partners, particularly the United States? Some political analysts were optimistic, believing that the confrontation could spark a re-evaluation of Brazil's role on the global stage, leading to more assertive international policies. Others, however, feared that it could lead to long-term diplomatic isolation in the United States. The political fallout from the clash began to influence the ongoing presidential race. Candidates seeking the Republican nomination used the episode to bolster their credentials as strong defenders of American interests, capitalizing on Trump's tough stance against Brazil. On the Democratic side, candidates and commentators expressed concern about the erosion of diplomacy under Trump's leadership, questioning whether his approach could alienate key allies in Latin America. Trump's tweets continued to dominate the media cycle, further inflaming the debate. His rhetoric of standing up to arrogant leaders resonated with his base, but it also alienated moderates and international allies. Many experts argued that the president's aggressive tone might ultimately backfire, undermining his credibility as a global leader. In contrast, Lula's critics in the U.S. painted him as an unpredictable and antagonistic figure, further deepening the polarization in public opinion. As the dust settled on the diplomatic front, attention turned to the economic implications of the crisis. Brazil's trade relations with the United States, particularly in sectors like agriculture and technology, were placed under the microscope. Would Trump's economic policies create new barriers for Brazilian exporters? In Brazil, fears of tariffs and restrictions led to a scramble by the Ministry of Economy to reassure the business community that negotiations would continue. But uncertainty loomed large over the future of trade deals that had previously been considered stable. The business community in Brazil was caught in a difficult position. Exporters to the U.S. were left wondering whether they would face new tariffs or trade barriers as a result of the diplomatic fallout, while some sectors, such as agriculture, were better prepared to weather a storm. Others, like the technology industry, were more vulnerable. The government scrambled to ease tensions by diversifying trade partners and promoting Brazil's potential as a global leader in sustainable development and technology. The episode also served to fuel the growing digital polarization that had become a hallmark of global politics. On social media, the hashtag Lula resists continued to trend as digital militancy from both sides of the political spectrum sought to gain ground. Pro-Lula groups framed the president's stance as a fight for Brazil's independence, while Trump supporters amplified their narrative of defending American interests against foreign adversaries. The digital clash became so intense that it transcended national borders. Influencers and activists in other countries took sides, further exacerbating the tension. Memes, viral videos, and opinion pieces flooded the internet, pushing the debate into new, often unpredictable directions. In this age of information warfare, even a diplomatic dispute between two political figures had the power to ignite global conversations. While the media continued to focus on the confrontation, behind the scenes, diplomatic channels were being quietly reactivated. Both the Brazilian and U.S. governments engaged in backdoor negotiations, looking for ways to de-escalate the tension and preserve the broader strategic relationship. Months after the initial confrontation, it became clear that the diplomatic rupture, though intense, had ultimately served as a catalyst for a more nuanced understanding of Brazil's role in the international arena. The global community began to view Brazil as more than just a partner to the United States. It was a rising power in its own right, capable of challenging established norms and shaping the direction of global politics. The crisis between Lula and Trump underscored several important lessons in international diplomacy. First, it highlighted the need for clear communication and the risks of public confrontations between leaders, especially when economic stakes are high. Second, it demonstrated the importance of managing domestic political narratives in a way that doesn't undermine international relations. Finally, the episode reinforced the idea that in a multipolar world, countries cannot afford to be passive players. They must assert their interests while maintaining diplomatic flexibility. For Lula, the episode became a defining moment in his presidency. It tested his ability to navigate the complex terrain of international relations, balancing national sovereignty with global cooperation. His handling of the crisis showcased his political resilience and his capacity to adapt to changing circumstances. However, it also revealed the limitations of Brazil's foreign policy and the challenges of maintaining strong diplomatic ties with the U.S. while asserting an independent course. For Trump, the confrontation further cemented his image as an unpredictable and forceful leader, willing to engage in high-stakes battles for the benefit of his country. His hardline approach may have resonated with his political base, but it also sparked criticism from both domestic and international actors who questioned the long-term sustainability of his tactics. As the dust settled on this chapter of U.S.-Brazil relations, the world looked on, mindful of the fact that the global political landscape had shifted. With rising powers like Brazil asserting their independence, the old dynamics of diplomacy were no longer as stable as they once were. In the years that followed, the episode served as a reminder that diplomacy is not just about finding common ground, it is about managing conflicts, asserting national interests, and navigating the complex web of global interdependence.